Da-na, da-na, da-na. Welcome back to another video. Da-na. Okay. Sweet. Okay. Like and subscribe, comment, da-da-da-da-da. James Bond. Here we go. Another lesson for you ladies and gents. Today we are talking about exposure does not equal understanding. So oftentimes there's this idea that if I'm around something long enough, that I naturally understand it. We'll be like, oh, I know this person. I've known them for 20 years. Or I've been in this field and I've been doing it for 20 years. Or I've been obsessed with this number 20 years. I hear this a lot. A lot of people will do something for a long time and they think that they'll understand it. And I have to question, how often do you meet people where they've known someone for a long time, but they don't know basic facts about them? Like you'll know siblings who are born and raised with each other, but they don't know each other's birthdays. Or you'll see friends who have known each other for a long time, but they don't know, like, oh, my parents died, or something really, really basic about them. How often do you guys experience that? I think especially when we create our relationships in things like the workplace, church, these third places, and these third places are typically not the third places actually, so secondary places, so primary place is like the home. A secondary place, which is based on necessity, but still like secondary, would be school or work. And then there's this thing called the third place, which is where like we go to hang out. So like bars, malls, and for most people, their phone. Okay? Or like online communities or whatever, right? So one of the biggest things we're struggling with as a social society is we're losing the third place. And so we just have these two places. And then a lot of people are losing this. So this becomes the primary focus, and then the whole structure crumbles apart. That's a conversation for another day. But basically it's this idea that just because you spend time does not equal depth. Does not equal depth. Spending more time does not mean you have more depth to something. That's why you can have people who have done something for a really long time, but they're not as good. You see it in athletics all the time, actually. So if you know athletes, you'll see that a lot of times there's a really, really talented young player. He'll come in and he'll have less experience, but he's clearly better than guys who have been there for a long time. Now, experience helps because in sports, typically you have to be quite experienced to stay, because sports are so demanding that in order to stay, you have to adapt. And that if you're not able to adapt, you leave very quickly. So sports is interesting because it forces people to have the essential qualities that are needed to create understanding. But there's a lot of things like workplaces, relationships, religion, politics, where you don't actually need to have much understanding to stay in them. That's why you can have someone who has a degree in like philosophy or like mathematics or internet, and then 40 years later, they don't know anything about current day philosophies or mathematics or the internet or computers because they just didn't evolve, right? So this is a really big misunderstanding, because a lot of times, the other day I spoke with a man, and it was very interesting. He was talking about his divorce, and he was like, yeah, my divorce just came out of nowhere. And very quickly when I was hanging out and spending time with this man, I could see that he was oblivious. He was just not, he missed details and very obvious things. Like he just wouldn't miss things, and that sometimes you would have to explain things to him. But what was very interesting is that when he paid attention, he could understand. So that's when you started seeing, oh, it's not that he's dumb, it's that he doesn't pay attention. And this is where we get into what is actual understanding. Because understanding equals attention plus awareness. And so you could just argue that attention is focused awareness, but really attention is a direction of where is your energy. So attention is just where you're directing your energy. And awareness is knowing what it is you're directing your energy towards. So it's being intentional about what you're looking at. And there are some people, very curious people, they do this so habitually, so subconsciously, that they naturally just soak in everything like sponges. These are people who you would call like, they're wise. Actually, let's switch colors because this guy needs a rest. These are people who you would say are wise. You might call them smart. You might say they're talented. But really all it is they know how to pay attention, and they're aware of what they're paying attention to. So because of that, they have a tendency to create a spiral with their understanding. Where there are some people, they can look at something, they might be able to direct their attention at it, but there's no awareness because they're not actually grown. They don't actually have the consciousness for it, right? And you see tons of people like that. I would say there's more people like this than not, and that's why a lot of people don't grow or advance. So if you find that you're really struggling to understand something, really check your awareness and check your attention. A really big example is there's a lot of people, for instance, who will focus on like money, right? Or focus on like relationships, and they're directing all their attention towards it, but they're not directing any level of awareness. They're not spreading their awareness to it. So let's talk about how we gain awareness, because attention is natural. That's just where we put our energy. Right now, if you're watching this video, maybe I'm all in the background or whatever, your attention there's a degree of attention you're naturally doing. This is just encoded into who we are. Now, awareness is based in one word, intention. And intention is key to understanding. It is the most vital aspect of understanding. So oftentimes, if you want to check someone's intention, look at their understanding, right? And anything, whether it's in sales and someone's trying to sell you something, or you're trying to sell something yourself, whether or not someone says they want to do something, ask about their understanding, how well they understand the thing. Especially if you understand the thing well, this will tell you a lot about their intention behind what they're doing. So for instance, like with this man, he was saying like, oh, I had no idea like why my marriage ended or whatever. And then I was like, well, why did your wife like do the divorce? What did she say? And he couldn't tell me. And I already know because of that, I know why his marriage failed. Because I was like, oh, it sounds like you weren't very intentional in your marriage. It sounds like your wife could detect that you were in your marriage, but you weren't really directing or really participating in it. And it was interesting because we were playing the game, and just like he was in his marriage, he played the game the same way. And when he received his prize, a subsidy, he returned it afterwards. And I was like, and I caught it right there. I was like, that's why it failed, because he doesn't receive things. And it was like he can go through something, have all this stuff happen, and he doesn't receive it. And it was very interesting because he complained about how he has a very bad memory. And I was like, yep, that checks, because he doesn't receive. He doesn't move he's not a very intentional person. And you could tell just by talking with him. And there's a lot of things that I could draw about. And I'm being critical of him in general, just so you guys can know or whatever. And yeah, it might sound like judgment, but the reality is it's just discernment, right? It's being able to tell like, okay, this someone is capable, this one's not paying attention. And discernment is really important, right? This is how because a discernment comes with awareness. And usually discernment comes because we're seeking understanding. Because I seek to understand people, I can therefore discern people. And discernment allows me to make judgments and decisions about the people I'm with and about what I'm around. And then based upon those decisions, I'm able to direct my life because I have understanding, right? And when you seek ye first understanding, and then all things will be added unto you. And when you have understanding, you're able to grow. So just because you're exposed to something and just because you're around something doesn't mean you understand it. Just like, it's like a good example is oftentimes, let's say you have a book, right? Let's say, here, let me grab it. Let's say I have a book here and I read the first page. Does that mean I read the book? Technically, in that moment, you can say, I read the book in a moment. But if I were to tell everyone, hey, I read that book, it's not any good, and then you found out I only read the first page, would you say I read the book? No, because I did the motion, but I only had that first exposure. I didn't go from beginning to the end. And what's very interesting is that when you gain understanding, there will be a complete cycle. You'll know you understand something when you can come back to the same conclusion with a deeper understanding or a deeper knowledge of what was present. This is what happens when we actually engage in thinking. Oftentimes, if you find that you're just going in circles and you're not able to do it, at that point, you're not actually thinking, you're doing what's called mentating. Mentating or mentation. And the best way to say mentation is it's essentially, I'll use a crude example because this will get through, but if, say, sex was thinking, mentation is masturbation, right? Like, it's kind of like thinking, but you're not actually participating in anything outside of the ego to participate it, so it's an incomplete thought. It's still an incomplete act. It gives the sensation of thinking, but it's not actually thinking because you're tricking yourself. And so this is what a lot of people, when they're like, I overthink. It's like, no, you mentate too much. Mental masturbation is mentating. Mental masturbation. And so this is oftentimes why people don't have understanding. A lot of people spend too much time mentating. They don't actually build anything. And so you might be like, well, how do I know when I actually have understanding? Well, if you've been watching my videos for a while, you probably know what I'm going to say, because everything comes down to the same basic principles, because it's all connected and it's all the same. Is at the end of the day, you have a spirit, you have a mind, you have a body. The body does, the mind thinks, the spirit feels. What does the spirit feel? The spirit feels emotions. The mind processes thoughts, and when those thoughts are processed, the body does action. In that order. So you have an emotion, it moves into a thought, it moves into an action. And then when you have that action, that creates an emotion, which then creates a thought, which then creates an action. And that's how everything works. Spirit, mind, body, back again. And the distribution, if you've been watching my videos, you know this, is 80, 18, 2. And so 80% of everything you're going through is your emotions, right? Anything that's happening, whether it's like me making this video right now, 80% of what is driving that interaction is my emotions. You might be like, well, it's your thinking, it's your thoughts. My thinking is only 18% of it. And then 2% of it is turning on the camera, talking to you guys listening. The difficulty is why we move into mentation and we think exposure, because you could watch this video and you could be like, man, I don't know what it is. And this is why a lot of people struggle to maintain attention for very long, because they don't know how to direct their attention, because they don't own their attention. They don't know how to generate it or direct it, because their being, their spirit, mind, and body is so low on the Hawkins scale. Their consciousness is so undeveloped that their attention can't move or process any higher level emotions. And when you can't process higher level emotions, you just gorge and eat again and again on these smaller emotions. Shame, guilt, fear, desire, apathy, pride. That's a really big one. And until we start learning to process higher level emotions, which take place in the mind, well, that evolve the mind. So this is courage, willingness, hope, and then acceptance, right at the top, acceptance. When we start to accept those, what happens is naturally our other faculties will begin to turn on. Because as human beings, we're designed to operate with a high level of talent and skills. Every single last human being has that capacity. But we lose that capacity, just like if you don't work out, you get fat and weak. If you don't exercise your brain and learn, you get slow and stupid, right? What you don't use, you lose. And just like when we were born with kids, we were naturally vibrating. Through time and space, our mind and our bodies began to follow suit. This is why, especially when people get older, you'll see a difference in how some people look so young and some people look so old. Because the genetic codes, our literal genetics, have the codes for this type of thinking. And this has been proven, actually. This is not just like something he's talking about. Like, what? What do you mean, like energy and your thoughts affect your DNA? That's like just hokey pokey pseudoscience. It's actually proven. It's called epigenetics. You could look it up, right? It's epigenetics. They've proven that. The way you think affects your genetics and your DNA. And the way your DNA goes then affects your generations. And so many of us are dealing with the generations and traumas, the spirit, mind, and body things of generations long past, right? That's why, like, if you have fat parents, you'll also be fat. But it's not that you can't change that. But in order to do that, you have to start in the spirit and then in the mind. And then eventually it'll translate in your body. And then what happens is then that happens over and over. And then once that changes, it changes. And then you break the cycle, right? And so in order to break those cycles, we have to be focused and with intention about the changes we're trying to create, which means you need to have understanding. The other day, and this is a really good example, so I'll tell you a story. So I had someone who wanted me to do him, so he wanted me to work with him, right? And I was like, okay, like, you want to be a client? Okay, sure. And then he had a very specific request of something that he wanted, and I was able to help him. So I said, okay, I can do this plan or whatever. And I should have known it was going to go awry when I'd asked him, okay, what have you done in order to make this happen or whatever? He's like, nothing, I'm just trying to explore right now. But what was very interesting, he was very pushy, and he was saying, like, I'm ready to do this, I'm going to do it, I'm going to whatever. And what was interesting is that he was saying, like, I've got the money, I'm ready to pay, all expenses taken care of, I'm going to do this. And then what was very interesting is I was talking with him, kind of seeing his understanding. And then I wanted to see if it was real, so I took him for a little test. And I, asked him to take care of some things for me. And what was very interesting was just as we were working is that when we started doing the work, when we actually, instead of talking about it, when we actually started working on it, his whole paradigm flipped. And then very quickly, I could see that he didn't have the understanding. And then because he didn't have the understanding, suddenly he flipped. He's like, well, I'm not sure. Your mentality is different than mine, And it was like, yeah, that's why you wanted to hire me. And it was very interesting, like, just how quickly that paradigm flipped. And it was because he hadn't invested in understanding, first off, who I was, and then in understanding what he wanted. And so even what he wanted, it was very funny. He started being critical of the thing he said he wanted. Right? And he was like, I want this thing. But then he started saying, oh, your mentality is like this or whatever. I'm like, well, yeah, my mentality is like that because I have that thing. In order to have that, I'm not going to be specific because I don't want to necessarily talk about his business or whatever. And if I get into details, people might know who he is. And so, but the idea is because he wanted this thing, I was like, yeah, in order to have this, you have to do this. And it was like, he was like, well, I don't know if I'm comfortable with that. I'm like, well, then you can't have this. It's like wanting a Lamborghini, but feeling uncomfortable paying for premium gas prices. That's what it was like. It was like, you say you want this like $500,000, $1 million car, but you're not willing to put the best gas in it. That's very strange, right? Don't you think that doesn't make sense? And then I was just talking with him and you could just tell he was processing it. And he was processing it for the first time because his actions talking to me, you could tell was the first time he had moved with any level of intention. And you could tell everything before, it was just, he was hyping himself up. He was just doing this mental masturbation. And then he wanted to move past it, so he made an action, which I'll give him credit for. He did an action, but then he got a response. And I saw that what you're wanting is not compatible with how you're moving. And rather than adjusting, he tried to force it. And so then eventually I just walked away. But what was very interesting is how often do we see this in our life, where someone is not moving with understanding and it's not going up in their actions. So we see that just because you do something over and over and over, or just because you talk about something over and over and over. Like someone who's had a book idea for 20 years, but they never write the darn book. And it's like, and it's always very obvious. Like before, when I was going to a lot of writers groups and like working on my writing career and like working on my first book, I remember when I used to talk about it and I was just like all these other people in these writers groups. When I finished my first and second book, I started to notice a shift, because when you write a book, it doesn't quite turn out the way you think it's going to be when it's done. And then the editing process and everything, like going through the actual process of writing the book changed my understanding of it. And that gave me experience. That gave me understanding. And then because I had that understanding, I didn't feel the need to talk so much about it. And what's very interesting is that then I would go back to these writers groups and it would be the same people. And there would be people who were there before me and they would say they were better writers than me. And they had farther along in their books when we started. But by now, they're still talking about that one book. And right now I've written and finished 9. Well, 13, depending on technicality, but I'm going to say confidently 9 that are published or all ready to go, hot off the presses. And 6 have been published. Check it out, links below, check out my books. Mr. Reference and The Girl and the Beast, super awesome. Love those books, check it out. But yes, understanding, guys. So you gotta understand that time does not equate to understanding. Just like that guy's marriage, just like a hobby, just like reading the first page of a book does not equate understanding. You actually have to go through the process. You have to do the icky work of going through the entire thing. And oftentimes when we don't understand and we seek understanding from others, we have to be willing to submit to their processes because they have understanding. We don't. And in order to have people's understanding, we need to listen to them. And so this is a lot of what I've come to understand. Oh, and this is a very key thing, that intention and time are not necessarily linked. This is why someone with a very high intention and a lot of attention can do a lot more in a lot less time, because they're intentional and they're paying attention. And so intention and attention, those are your 2 key assets, right? That's the matter and intelligence of it all. And if you work with this, actually the matter is attention and the intelligence is intention, but whatever. But intention and attention, this is how you create understanding. And then with understanding, you'll have wisdom, and with wisdom, you will have progress. So there's your guys' lesson for the day. Hope all is well. Stay happy, stay healthy. I'd love to ask you a question. Actually, let me write this out. Also, by the way, post any comments you guys have down below. I would love to see what you guys are getting from these lessons and these books and these stories. It would be very, very cool. I want to see it. But here's the question. Where am I lacking understanding? And ask yourself, is it about my intention? Or is it about my attention? That's your food for thought for the day, okay? Where am I lacking understanding? And is it in my attention or is it in my intention? Stay happy, stay healthy. Peace.